Hey, what's up, YouTube family? It's your favorite black gentleman from Nebraska, melanated gentleman from Nebraska, and yes, there are melanated people here. I will say this. I'm going to say this. This is probably going to be one of the most, if not the most important bombshell drops of content on this page. Like, everybody needs to see this. Everybody. Everybody needs to see this. Not even black people. Everybody needs to see this. This is going to be, like, I'm going to do my best to try to reword the title to get it pushed in the algorithm. Like, I'm going to get disrespectful in the title to get this pushed into the algorithm. And I mean, this needs to be heard. This is probably, like I said, I'm going to say it again because I truly believe this. This is probably the most, if not one of the most important piece of content that I will ever produce on my page. I mean, bar none. I'm gonna just kind of tell you. The father of African American studies and Pan-Africanism. You see the name in the title. Herskovits. So the father of Pan-Africanism and American and African American studies is not black. This person is a white immigrant. And if I had a bombshell sound effect, it would be there. I made a short about it to kind of, let people know like it's coming. So it's here and I'm about to drop it. And you know which book I'm in. That's not even up for discussion on which book, and you know what book I'm in. All my followers know what book I'm in. I don't even gotta say it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this journey, man. So, and just to let you guys know, this is being done on my phone, so please have patience with me. I probably won't finish the whole thing because it's a lot of information. I'll probably finish some of it and do the rest on my laptop. But just bear with me, okay? But man, this is going to be good. Melville Jean Herskovits. Melville Jean Herskovits, born to the Jewish immigrants in Bellefontaine, Ohio in 1895. Herskovits, a first-generation American anthropologist and eugenicist who first established African American studies in American academia. You heard that right. He is credited for connecting two completely unique and separate cultures, claiming one was a derivative of the other, as they like to tell it, African cultures expressed in Black and American communities. These studies were the first of its kind, conducted by the people whose main goal was to ultimately exterminate and are convinced Americans reclassified as Negro and colored that they are from Africa, in hopes many will go back, as they put it, which later became dubbed the Back to Africa movement we will touch on in this chapter. In 1923, Melvin Jean Herskovits earned a Bachelor of Philosophy at the University of Chicago, afterwards moving to New York City for graduate work. Earning his MA and PhD in anthropology from Columbia University under the guidance of the German-born American anthropologist Franz Boas. Or Boas. I don't know. Who's Franz Boas? Franz Yuri Boas, July 19, 1858 to December 21st, 1942, was a German-American anthropologist and a pioneer of modern anthropology who has been called the father of American anthropology. His work is associated with the movements known as historical particularism and cultural relativism. Boas was one of the most prominent opponents of then popular ideologies of scientific racism. The idea that race is a biological concept and that human behavior is best understood through the typology of biological characteristics. In a series called so-called studies of skeletal anatomy, he claimed that cranial shape and size was highly malleable depending on environmental factors such as health and nutrition, in contrast to the claims by racial anthropologists of the day that held head shape to be a stable racial trait. Boas also worked to demonstrate that differences in human behavior are not primarily determined by innate biological dispositions, but are largely the result of our cultural differences. acquired through social learning. In this way, Boas introduced culture as the primary concept for describing differences in behavior between human groups and as the central analytical concept of anthropology. What do you hear today? Oh, it's not the people, it's the culture. Boas also introduced the idea of cultural relativism, which holds that cultures cannot be objectively ranked as higher or lower, or better or more correct, but that all humans see the world through the lens of their own culture and judge it according to their own cultural acquired norms. For Boas, the object of anthropology was to understand the way in which culture conditioned people to understand and interact with the world in different ways, and to do this, it was necessary to gain an understanding of the language and cultural practices of the people studied. By uniting the disciplines of archaeology, the study of material culture and history, and physical anthropology, the study of variation in human anatomy with ethnology, the study of cultural variation of customs and descriptive linguistics, the study of unwritten indigenous languages, Boas created the four-field subdivision of anthropology, which became prominent in American anthropology in the 20th century. In 1926, Herskovits wrote a thesis titled The Cattle Complex in East Africa, investigated theories of power and authority in Africa as expressed in the ownership and raising of cattle. He studied and claimed that some aspects of African culture and traditions were expressed in Black American culture in the 1900s. Among his fellow students were future anthropologists. Catherine Durham, American dancer, choreographer, turned anthropologist, and social activist, Dunham had one of the most successful dance careers of the 20th century and directed her own dance company for many years. She has been called the matriarch and queen mother of Black dance. Ruth Benedict, feminist, anthropologist, folklorist, she studied the relationships between personality, art, language, and culture and insisted no trait existed in isolation or self-sufficiency, a theory that she championed in her 1934 book, Patterns of Culture. She also had romantic relations with Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead, anthropologist and on sexual behavior. She was a proponent of broadening sexual conventions within the context of Western cultural traditions and social norms regarding sexuality. Lesbian feminists who had romantic relations with anthropologist Ruth Benedict. Elsie Clues Parsons, anthropologist, sociologist, folklorist, and feminist who studied American nations such as the Tiwa and Hopi in Arizona, New Mexico, and Mexico were clearly descent from the Plains nations. And Frances Shapiro, who Herskovits married in Paris in 1924. They later had a daughter, Jean Herskovits, who became a historian. She was a so-called researcher professor of history at the State University of New York at Purchase, specializing in African, particularly Nigerian history and politics. Herskovits taught at Brown University, Swarthmore College, City College of the University of New York, and Columbia University. She held a D. Phil in African American history from Oxford University. In 1927, Herskovits moved to Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, as a full-time anthropologist. In 1928 and 1929, he and his wife Frances Herskovits did field study in Suriname among the Sarama, then called Bush Negroes, and jointly wrote a book about the people. What is a field study? A field study is a research method that involves conducting observations and collecting data in a natural setting. The method includes observing, interviewing, and interacting with participants in their environment, such as workplace, community, or natural habitat. In 1934, Herskovits and his wife Frances spent more than 3 months in the Haitian village of Maribilis, the findings of which research they published in his book, 1937 book, Life in the Haitian Valley. In its time, this work was portrayed as one of the most accurate depictions of the Haitian practice of voodoo. They meticulously detailed the lives and voodoo practices of Maribilis residents during their 3-month stay, also conducting field studies in African countries, Benin, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, Guinea, and West Indian islands of Trinidad, Brazil, Haiti. In 1938, Herskovits established a new department of anthropology at Northwestern. In the early 1940s, Herskovits and his wife Frances met Barbara Hoodley Steen, who was in Brazil to do research on abolition of slavery. She introduced them Stanley J. Steen, a white American graduate student in Latin American history at Harvard. With advice from Herskovits, Steen recorded so-called black songs called Django, also known as Kaksambu or Tubu is a dance and musical genre of black communities from southeast Brazil, which received considerable scholarly attention. Herskovitz also influenced white musician Alan Lomax, who copied and collected black American music, converting them into what they would later call folk song. And I believe what we're going to start reading is a conversation. Reese, you said that Melville Herskovitz at Northwestern was first introduced to anthropology? Foster, yes, he was. I hardly knew the term before then. I told you last week how I was floundering around at Northwestern, and one of the girls I had gone with in high school told me about a course she was taking, and that it was called anthropology, and it was all about Indians, and that's how I got into anthropology. I think chance has been the telltale of my whole life, and I don't know what that means. Sorry. Reese, the first definition of anthropology for you was that it was all about Indians. It's a question. It was all about Indians? Foster, that was my first definition. I had been interested in the out of doors, and I had read a lot of books about the West. I realized I read a good many travel books. The Royal Road to Romance, Richard Halberton, came out when I was about 13 or 14, published in 1925. That turned me on. And there was another fellow called Harry A. Frank, whom my father read widely. He wrote books with titles like Vagabonding Down the Andes. He was a terrible writer. You knew how his feet felt, but you didn't know what he had seen or what the people he met felt or thought. I don't know why my father liked him. I tried reading several of his books, but I just couldn't take him. I've always been interested in how other people are and how they live. I mentioned my trip to Puerto Rico as the great experience of my life up to that time, and the trip to China in 1933 again. I just devoured every moment of it, but still don't think of becoming an anthropologist. I don't know why. Reese, and Herskovitz convinced you that you could become an anthropologist? Foster, yes. It was my personal magnetism and ability as a teacher. The first course in the spring of 1934, the spring of my junior year, was largely cultural anthropology. But he set the field. He told us about archaeology and linguistics and biological anthropology. He was a cultural anthropologist himself. But he had also worked with the physical anthropology of Negroes. Africa was his great field, of course. He was one of the later students of Franz Boas, who had trained both Lowy and Kraber also. So you might say that I was trained a third generation Boasian, as were most of the anthropologists in this country at that time. Reese, earlier controversies about race and eugenics, were they still live issues in cultural anthropology when you started your work? By the time I got into anthropology, I think for about 10 or 15 years before that, the thing that all our professors hammered on was that race, language, and culture are all separate, that any race is capable of carrying any culture and speaking any language, that there's no such thing as an organic relationship between race and language and culture. Boas hammered on that. Cultural relativism or biological relativism was also central then, at least in my experience. That is, Herskovitz told us, and I think it was generally what was being taught in school, that any apparent differences in the ability of races was due to cultural background and not to race. So it was a sound, and I think very good way to start us out. Reese, did you know that there was an issue there? Yes. Let's see. Madison Grant wrote The Passing of the Great Race, 1916. That was the book my dad had read. So I saw it at home. For a while, I thought he had read all the wrong books on anthropology. Chuckling. Yes, we were very much aware of the eugenics movement, or at least I was, but it was not a basic part of our training, other than to have it rejected. Reese, what are your textbooks? Well, for physical anthropology, we read Ernest Albert Houghton, Up from the Ape, 1931. Up from the Ape. Wow. And we also read parts of Kroeber's 1922 anthropology. I don't remember what we read in our introductory course. I believe we read Funny. I remember what some of the books were here at Cal, but I can't remember my undergraduate books. And the conversation continues. Did Herskovitz write a text? Yes, but he wrote it after I left. His text, Man and His Works, came out in 1948. Reese. Hans E. Pronofsky, who in 1979 was curator of the Herskovits Library at Northwestern, wrote this about Herskovits. Herskovits spent his entire working life at Northwestern University. He came here in 1927 and taught here until his death in 1963. He was one of the first academics interested in Africa and theoretical matters. There was his cultural relativism, which is probably his main theoretical contribution, adopted from the psychology most of all. He was not foremost a theorist. He was interested in the whole humanistic range of anthropology, be it music, culture, the fine arts, and so on. But it would not be correct to say that he found a school. I think that with his death, the direction taken by the anthropology changed considerably, and the sort of humanistic emphasis was considerably lessened. Wow. In Going Beyond Kingship, Sex and the Tribe, Scientific Publishers, Belgium, 1979, pages 69 to 70. Foster, that's a fair statement of him. Reese, cultural relativism adopted from psychology most of all. What does that mean? I don't know what it means. Know what it is by that. I don't know what is meant by that. Adopted from psychology, I didn't realize. If Herskovits in fact did draw on the psychology, that his ideas of cultural relativism came from psychology, and I doubt that was the main impetus. It was pretty general among anthropologists, beginning with Boas. As I said, Lowy and Kroeber all had the same view. Reese, and not foremost a theorist? What does that mean? The dominant motive in anthropology in those days, and for a great many years thereof, was the natural history idea that there are all these facts out there, and we're going to lose them if we don't gather them. And we saw our job. And we saw our job in ethnology, at least, to describe as many so-called primitive people as possible, as rapidly as possible. Boas was the person who said that thing, said theory can come later, which was an unfortunate way to put it, because if you gather your data with theory in mind, you get much more relevant data. Certainly there was little emphasis at Northwestern and at Berkeley on what I would call theory, or else I was so stupid that it went over my head. I don't know. I think anthropologists work very much like Charles Darwin, who gathered masses of data. It's a natural history approach rather than a laboratory approach. Darwin was lucky in that he had a triggering experience and the Galapagos that brought it all together for him. That's the way anthropology works. Most of us don't have a Darwinian experience, but we like to. Reese, did you declare a major in anthropology in your junior year, or what? At the beginning of my senior year, I walked into the gym to register, and I don't know what my major was going to be. I thought it was going to be anthropology, but Herskovits was not yet back from a summer of research in Haiti. Just as the last minute he got back, and I registered as an anthropology major. The dean had to stretch the rules a bit to get me a major, because it wasn't possible to take enough anthropology to have a legitimate major. But I had taken a history course from Laura and a couple of psychology courses, one from Mara and another general psychology course, which was the dullest course I'd ever had, and a sociology course, which turned me off from sociology as well. So these courses were cobbled together. I took a BS degree, Bachelor's in Science degree in anthropology, because of the engineering units that I had. I didn't have enough liberal arts units to be a BA degree. I'm probably the only anthropologist in the country with a Bachelor's Science degree who was not a biological anthropologist. Reese. That reminds me of Panofsky remarks referring to the whole range of anthropology, music, culture, the fine arts, and so on. Foster. Herskovits certainly was fond of music. He was a wonderful drummer. He gave a wonderful course on primitive art. He was very sensitive to the aesthetic side of culture, and he communicated his ideas very well to his students. When I came to Berkeley, I found the greatest difference was the emphasis on facts. We had to memorize thousands of facts. For a while, it seemed very dull, very elemental. But in the long run, I think it was a good idea, or good, that I had both experiences. Comparing my Herskovits notes to those of Lowy and Kroeber, each lecture was very thin. the notes I had from Herskovits, but I remember very well the lectures and the way he had an easy way of talking. He'd ask students questions. I told you about his questions about cassava and my answer. The class had about 40 students. It was an ideal size for a learning experience. When you say thin, what do you mean? As in not masses of material? Not masses of actual data. Not masses of factual data is what I meant. In Lowy's course, I remember I was so busy writing the facts as they tumbled out that I was astonished when the 50 minutes had gone by. In Herskovits' class, I took relative few notes, but probably remember more of what he sold because I could concentrate on the ideas he was discussing. Reese, to the degree that he was more aware of the humanistic aspects, art, music, has that given you a different view? Has that not been a big influence? No, I don't think it was. I've always been much interested in material culture, but art as such I've not specialized in, and music I don't drum, I can't sing, I can't do anything artistic. Reese, was there an important museum at Northwestern when you were there? Foster, not at all. The Field Museum in Chicago was the museum, which I of course had gone to from my childhood. Every time we come to Chicago, I go to the Field Museum. I couldn't imagine going to Chicago without going to the Field Museum. Did Herskovits' work in Africa interest you? And this is towards the end. I hope this wraps everything up. Yes, for a while. I thought I'd be going to Africa. My senior year at Northwestern, the year I was deeply in anthropology, there was a British physical anthropologist named Jack Trevor, who was Herskovits' first postdoc. Jack and I became good friends. We planned to do fieldwork in the Great Rift Valley of East Africa. He would do the physical anthropology, and I would do the cultural anthropology, but it never came to pass. And when I came to Berkeley, without any African influence here at all, I turned to Mexico, and I'm very happy that I did. I didn't get to Africa, really, until a great many years later. I've seen quite a bit of Africa now through my consulting, but I find Mexico tops very interesting. So there was some little bit of aspects of things in that conversation that I kind of got an idea of, that a lot of time when what she understood about anthropology and archaeology and physiology was more of ideas and not of really facts. Like she said, she didn't really get too much factual information. It was just all ideas of, what they saw, what they felt like was true when it came to these cultures. So that conversation was, it seemed like it may have not been, needed. I would say the first 2 pages of this content was where the meat was, guys. This conversation was okay. I mean, there's some things in there you can learn from, but I didn't really get a lot from that. So if you're still here, I really appreciate the fact that you're still here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for still being here towards the end of this video. I really appreciate it, man. You're a trooper. But I hope the most of what I learned was from the first 2 pages. The first 2 slides was where all the meat, the meat, the potatoes, and everything else was. Towards the end was just like, salad with no dressing. You know what I mean? Just straight leaves. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please like, share, and subscribe. All right, I'm gonna drop more content on you guys. You already know I'm gonna drop every day, sometimes 2-3 times a day. All right, I hope you guys have a good night. God bless. It's your favorite melanated brother from Nebraska. I'm out. Peace.